Okay, colleagues, welcome. It is 12:30 in South Africa. I believe, Professor Bouter, if you are there, I think it's about 11:30 in the Netherlands, right? Are you 1 hour behind us now?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you again for being willing to present to us. I would just like to briefly introduce you for those colleagues who don't know you. We have almost 40 people in the room. I believe some others might still come in. So Professor Lex Bouter, we got to know him really with his involvement in the World Conferences on Research Integrity. Many of you might know that the latest one was in Cape Town last year, and we had the privilege of attending that. It was really a wonderful event. Some of our colleagues were closely involved also together with Professor Bouter and the leadership of the World Conferences on Research Integrity to work on the program committee and so on. So that was really a wonderful event, and it was through that we got to know you, Lex, and you became a friend of Stellenbosch University very quickly. You also kindly presented to us here in the same building where I'm sitting now, in Stellenbosch, before the conferences even. So Professor Lex Bouter is a Professor Emeritus of Methodology and Integrity at the Department of Epidemiology and Data Science of the Amsterdam University Medical Centers and the Department of Philosophy and of the Faculty of Humanities of the Vrije Universiteit. He's involved in research and teaching on research integrity and open science topics. He was appointed as tenured Professor of Epidemiology in 1992 and served his university as its rector between 2006 and 2013. Professor Bouter also supervised 78 PhD students, of whom to date 17 were appointed as professor. That's quite a nice track to do of your PhD students. Wonderful impact. And as I said, he is the founding chair of the World Conferences on Research Integrity Foundation, and this is, of course, where we got to know him. And yeah, we really look forward to your presentation. Thank you again for being willing to engage with us, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Terina, for this nice introduction. And I hope you all can see my screen now and my presentation.
Yes, we can.
What I have in mind is to spend this hour you graciously allowed me, and after that we will have 30 minutes of Q&A, I believe, to this menu. I will introduce the topic a little bit from different corners. Then I'll tell a little bit, well, in a way, refreshing your memory, I guess, about the replication crisis and the connected need for open science. And then I'll zoom into research integrity and present some research that has been done recently in the Netherlands on the topic. And you might want to repeat it in South Africa as well. That might be a nice idea. And then I come to the main course in a way, and that is what research institutes like universities and university medical centers can do to improve the research culture and to remove perverse incentives. And in that part, which is the main chunk of my lecture, I will also allude to some modern problems like paper mills and fake publications and what have you in that awful corner of academia. And then I will also allude to what journals and publishers can and should do. But let me introduce the topic by saying what I think about when I talk about research integrity. And that is quite simple. Research integrity is about behavior of individual researchers and of groups of researchers, in as far as it impacts validity, truth, if you like, or trust in research and researchers. And when I say individual and group behavior, I don't mean to blame the researchers solely for stuff that's going wrong in academia. It's clear that it is driven, that behavior, by circumstances like the local research culture and also the incentives and sometimes the perverse incentives in academia. And we'll come to that later on. And when I say truth, I mean validity in the sense of objective knowledge, knowing that there is debate around it, and of course that we can never know whether we got it completely right, but it's about the direction we want to go in research. And to me, trust is the core thing, because without trust, we cannot collaborate together and we cannot use the research that has been done before us. And also, our work cannot be applied in society when the members of society don't trust what we did. So trust is key. And you need to deserve that trust. And you do that by being trustworthy. That sounds a bit circular, but I mean that there should be good reasons to trust scientists. And transparency, I believe, and I will argue further on, will help a lot to gain in trustworthiness and to build trust among other scientists and among in the population at large. And I will also argue that open science practices, like you have open methods, open data, open codes, they can help enormously to be transparent and thus be accountable and making it traceable what you did. So that is basically the flavor of the whole thing. But when we talk about research integrity, there are two closely related concepts that are a bit overlapping, but to me quite distinct as well. One is research ethics. Research ethics to me is everything you can and you cannot do to humans and animals participating in your research. And yes, of course, when you do awful things to animals or humans in your research, that can also compromise trust and validity. And then it's in the overlapping zone between the two. And the third thing is what we call in continental Europe responsible research and innovation, which is about a societal dimension of research. And it goes in the corner of, does it harm or benefit society or nature? And when research does that, harm society or nature, um, it can go together easily with loss of trust and loss of validity. And then again, there is an overlapping zone there. But I will focus on research integrity, although we will dwell a little bit in some overlapping zones as well. Like I thought before in my short introduction, research is about trust. And you see here the pictures of two of my philosopher friends with whom I collaborate in this slightly more reflective part of my career. And Jeroen de Ridder, he wrote a really nice article about what you need to be able to trust the science, what makes a scientist trustworthy. And then together with the other colleague, Rick Pales, I added a little bit of in the sense of criteria of what you need to look at to get trust and for being trustworthy. Here it is. Jeroen said you can trust researchers if and only if their claims are backed up by evidence, by empirical evidence, and that evidence should be gathered in accordance with methodological standards. That's quite clear. It's not that easy to apply this criterion, but it's quite clear what is meant. So sound methodology matters, which I like a lot, of course. I am a methodologist by nature. Um, and we're talking about empirical evidence. That's the corner. I'm not denying that there are other corners in academia, but that's the corner I'm concerned with during this presentation. And together with Rick Pales, we dissected a little bit on what trustworthiness of research depends. First, of course, there is the prior probability. Um, when findings are too good to be true, usually they aren't true. That's a simple thing. I can make a whole Bayesian story about it as well, in which prior probability is a really forceful concept, but I will leave that out of this lecture. The second thing, that's a methodological quality, which bears on validity, of course. You need to do it right to get it right. And the study size has to do with reliability in the sense of precision. So these two are important as well. You can trust small studies less than big ones, and poor studies less than good ones. That's basically the idea. And there are ways to decide on the methodological quality. And again, I'll leave that out. The number of replications matters. In fact, when there is no replication, I believe you should never trust a research finding. You need at least one successful replication, and typically you need more. And when you have replications and also internally among the findings, you need consistency. And the more consistency, the more you can trust the findings. And then, of course, it might be obvious, but we listed it as well. It depends on what is at stake, whether you can trust research. Because when it's a matter of life and death and the future of humanity, well, your demands need to be a lot higher than when it's about some piece of trivial knowledge. So that is what we could bring up. And if you're interested, you can have a look at the paper. And by the way, um, I sent to Tarina and her colleagues my presentation, and below all the slides are all references to YouTube videos, to papers, to books, TED Talks, what have you. So if you're interested, they will probably send it around by email or put it on a website somewhere. So you're welcome to visit the material in some depth. This is how things hang together in my view. I already alluded to the fact that validity and trustworthiness is the key thing in research integrity. And to be able to have that trust and to establish whether something is valid, you need a high level of transparency. And what are the enemies of trust and validity are the capital sins of fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. That's the normal list we have, and also the multitude of questionable research practices that usually do less damage to validity and trust, but they are so frequent and there are so many that together they are an important determinant in the negative sense of validity and trust as well. And in the last decade, we also discovered that the replication crisis, to which I will allude in a few later slides, the fact that studies, when you redo them, will not lead to the same findings in at least half of the cases. This problem, this crisis, is also caused by questionable research practices. So that's the connection in a way between problems with research integrity and the replication crisis. They're both partly caused by questionable research practices. Now, the good news is that we have this wonderful thing called open science, which leads to transparency, because that's by definition what open science is all about. And its methods, like open methods, open codes, and open data, they are increasingly considered to be the responsible research practices. There are more and different responsible research practices, of course, but a main chunk of it are open science modalities. And these are the green arrows, of course, they can lower and help prevent replication problems. They can prevent and lower levels of questionable research practices. They probably will not change this type of criminal behavior, because that is what it is, but it can enable detection, because when everything is open, it's more easy to detect these awful things. So that is how, in my view, these things hang together, and why I sometimes emphasize research integrity, sometimes the replication crisis, and sometimes open science. But on average, the story remains the same, no matter where you start the narrative. Now, let me say a few things about this replication crisis. We know by now, and a wonderful systematic review and meta-analysis has just been published as preprint by Kelly Colby and a lot of colleagues. The reference is again below the slide. We know that 10 to 50%, that was the first estimate. Kelly Colby and colleagues says, well, 40 to 50. That's on average from many disciplines and subdisciplines what we get. And that is, of course, not good enough. That when you do study again in exactly the same way, you would expect to get the same findings. Most of the cases, maybe not 100% of the cases, but most of the cases. And 40 to 50% is way too low. That is labeled the replication or reproducibility crisis. This is from a Nature paper among UK scientists, a lot of them, and well, pinkish and red says, yes, we recognize this. This is a real problem. So it's recognizable, we know it. Two societies for art and sciences, the Royal one in the Netherlands and the three US societies wrote beautiful reports on them, I believe. Boring as reports go, but comprehensive and a great source of documentation. So when you want to know more about the replication crisis, look at that. And when you want to know more about the consequences, maybe read this short article by John Ioannidis. And John, he argues, in my view, completely rightly, that replication is more important than discovery. Because a discovery, that can be anything. It can be a chance finding, it can be an error, it can be also fraud, of course. We need at least one and typically more replications to be able to believe that it's right. So trust comes with replications. And the weird thing is that well, the prestige of replications up to recently was so low. This was an endeavor for second-rate scientists who couldn't think about a new exciting hypothesis. No, replication is essential. And we echo the same thing in this article in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology. And you see now things shifting, although not rapidly. It's still not easy to get replication studies published, but improvements are made there. This is the main driver of replication problems, I believe, and I'm not the only one believing that, and that is selective reporting. And what you see here is an extraordinary example. It's an example from drug research. These are 105 randomized clinical trials comparing a new antidepressant drug against a placebo, a fake drug. And this column is what the FDA makes of it. The FDA is severe. They are the gold standard. They want all your data when you want to submit your drug for the market, and they have to give permission for it. They reanalyze and they tear apart all your data. This is the gold standard. What the FDA says is probably better than what you yourself say after the analysis of the study. And they say 50-50. 50% of the studies is positive in the sense that the new drug wins from the placebo. The other half is negative in the sense that there is no difference, or even the placebo wins from the new drug. Now, when we wait a few years and look what is published, surprise, surprise, almost all positive trials have been published and only half of the negative trials. Please note that usually you see only this column. Usually you don't have this. For most topics in research, you don't have this. This is an exception. But now we have the gold standard, and we know that this is biased. We call that type of bias publication bias. The impression is that a new drug usually works, which is not the case. It works in only half of the cases. But it gets worse. When you publish on a study, you typically don't report on everything you measured. And people leave out primary and also secondary outcomes that were in their plan, in their study protocol. The FDA knows that because they have that plan. But you, as a reader, don't have that plan. Typically, it's nowadays better, but typically you don't have that. And then you get outcome reporting bias. You can be silent about negative outcomes, and when you still have a few positive ones, you can make a negative study positive. That's a kind of miracle. That's really wonderful. And when you do so, more negativity goes away. So now the large majority of the study seems to be positive. And it gets a little bit worse again when you consider spin. And spin is that you can play with words. You can make positive findings, you can emphasize them, and you can play down negative findings. And you can do it in title, in abstract, in discussion, throughout the article. You cannot make a negative study positive that way, but you can make a red bullet pinkish or yellow or light green even. So again, hardly any negativity left. And when we compare that to that, we see the problem um, according to the three modes of selective reporting. That is the animal, the beast we are facing. And when you redo such a study, you would expect a positive finding almost always, but it happens in only half of the cases. Now, that is the core driver of the replication crisis. And, and this makes it one step worse when you look at the next generation, and two of my PhD students did. Um, you discover that negative studies, that positive studies, I should say it that way, are cited 3 to 5 times more than negative studies. And that is depicted by a larger green bullet and a smaller red bullet. So almost all negative results appeared in the second generation. So this is the beast. There are more causes of the problem. Selective reporting we talked about. Connected is low power, slow studies, small studies, larger chance findings you have, and then it goes all over the place and reproducibility is lower. You can have p-hacking, like my favorite statistician always said. When you torture your data enough, they will always confess, and that's true. When you start analyzing completely clueless and try everything, you always get a nice result. And the same, in another way, accounts for hacking, which is hypothesizing after results are known. Um, we all do that, and this king knew it already as well. He shoots away his arrows, and the lackey makes sure that he hits the bullet's eye every time. That's what we do often when we write papers. We look at our favorite tables and start fantasizing about what may explain that wonderful table and these wonderful results. That is not hypothesis testing. That is bringing up hypothesis after you know the outcome of the study already, which is nice in the explorative mode, but not in the hypothesis testing mode. Hence my call for more transparency. Uh, Open methods, open codes, and open data most specifically. It should always be available prospectively. For open methods, that means, and we call it pre-registration or registration, that there should be a study protocol, a complete detailed study protocol floating in the cyberspace with a timestamp on it, which will never go away. Um, it might be under embargo, it might be under embargo forever, but it's there. And when there is an investigation for research integrity allegations, for instance, you can give the committee the keys to that piece of information, and they can check whether you did what you wanted. And the same holds for journals. Many journals nowadays demand that they can have a pre-registered study protocol to check in your paper manuscript whether you did what you promised to do. Same holds for open codes, data analysis codes, that is. So open data analysis, you can say as well, but codes is a bit broader. It should be there, and you should publish it in the cyberspace with a timestamp on it before you look at your data. Um, And the same holds for open data. They should be out there. You can do that anytime as long as it is the data set you collected and it is well supplemented with good metadata, which makes it usable for others who want to check what you did or want to reuse your data for other purposes. Again, all these three things need to happen prospectively. And it would be nice to have if they are public at some stage without or with a short embargo. But that's not essential. Being there is essential, and this is nice when it's possible, and that's more open than that, of course. But this is the core idea. An important organization in that sense is the Center of Open Science in the USA. It was started and still led by Brian Nosek and colleagues, and these are a few of these wonderful colleagues. This is a beautiful PNAS publication where they explain why pre-registration is so essential. And they even argue, and I agree, that you can forget about statistical analysis when there is no pre-registration and a data protocol connected to that, because you can prove with statistics about everything you want once you are creative enough and try enough different things. So forget about statistics unless everything is time-stamped in the cyberspace. That is what they argue, and I agree. And nowadays, there is even something better, because the problem with pre-registration is that it does not guarantee that the results will be published. You can still not publish the result. You can still have outcome reporting bias. You can still have spin uh, with a registered study. The only thing is that you can check whether these things happen. And when there is no pre-registration, you cannot check whether these things happen. So it's better than nothing, but it's not good enough. And what is good enough is a thing called registered report. And we're now talking about early adoption stage, because only about a little bit less, more than 200 journals adopted this idea. And the idea is someone has a mic open, so
Colleagues, please just switch off mics. Thanks. Sorry, now we've Professor Bouter, just hold on for a minute. I think somebody tried to mute all and now managed to mute you as well. So let's just try to fix that quickly. Who can help me?
It's now fixed.
There you go. There you go. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I found the button. So let's move on then.
Okay.
Thank you. Registered reports, they go in two stages. What you do is you get a grant first, and you get medical ethics or animal committee permission for your study if you need it. Then you write your article. What that is, the first half of it, the introduction and the method section, that you send to a journal. Please note that you have not yet collected data. You send it to a journal, the editor and the reviewers decide in the typical cycle with major revision, minor revision, what have you, whether they want to publish your paper. They have all they need, the editor and the reviewers. In the introduction, they can read what you're going to do, and they can judge whether this is a relevant thing. And in the method section, they can read whether you are going to do it well. And that's all they need. They don't need to be distracted by the results, because replication problems and selective reporting are driven by editors and reviewers a lot as well, of course. I haven't said that, but I say it now. Then when you have permission to publish, paper is accepted, you're going to collect your data and analyze your data to write your report, you submit it, and the only thing that the reviewers and the editor check is whether you did what you promised in the first two sections of your paper. And if you did, they publish the thing. Now, recently, this is in social sciences, it has, as far as I know, not yet been done in biomedicine, but it will be done, it's on the way. A comparison between registered reports, 71 of them, and carefully matched, 2 per registered report, standard reports, so not using this innovative scheme, were compared. And what happened is that less than 45% of the registered reports had positive results on their main conclusion, and while more than 95% of the standard report has positive results on the main conclusion. This is the usual thing, and this is partly caused by selective reporting, is the idea. And this is more or less the proof of the pudding, because this is an excellent killer of selective reporting. And that is what you see. Less than half of the studies in this sample are positive. So here we kill selective reporting, and there is a bonus. The bonus is wonderful, and I love that as a methodologist, because the bonus is that when you do so, you get better methodology. These are all indicators for methods, and they're all not all statistically significant. This is another study, similar comparison. For all indicators, the registered reports are superior. And how come? The reason is that now, when you are a reviewer and an editor and you comment on a study, you can still influence the practicalities. You can influence the study design. I've spent my whole career commenting on manuscripts for journals, uh, telling what was wrong with the method usually. But I only recently, when the registered report came along, realized that this was quite useless because the studies had already been done that were reported in the manuscripts I was judging. Now, when I'm a reviewer of a registered report, I can help the researchers to make their study better. And that is what you see here, I believe. The suggestions can still be adopted. There can be an amendment of the registered report of the study, and then you can execute the improved study design and publish later a better study from the methodological stance. This is really wonderful. My humble prediction is that this is the future because it is so wonderful. There is a problem, of course, as well, and the adoption goes slower than you might expect because usually researchers, when they have their grants and they have their permissions from all committees and they have their budget, they are behind their planning already and they want to start their data collection. They don't want to spend 4, 5, 6, 7 other months waiting for the acceptance of registered reports. And for that reason, I don't have a slide on that. It's that new. There is now something wonderful as well. Um, there is now the Center of Open Science has the initiative to let funding agencies and journals collaborate. And what happens is that now the funding agencies, when they are in this collaboration, they say, hey, this is interesting. We want to study, to fund your study. Please go ahead. By the way, there is only one condition which is important. You only get your money once you have accepted a registered report for this study. So it's a condition for getting the grant. And when they're kind, and usually they are in this experiment, they give also some funding to enable the writing of the registered report on the plan. So it will be a little bit of money, and you get the rest to execute the study once you have an accepted registered report. Again, it's not foolproof. Some people might even decide not to write a full report after they have accepted the registered report, but that will be rare, I guess. So this will help to adopt registered reports more because the funders demand it. And we've seen that happen before. Um, Remember that open data was rare. Hardly anyone was doing that in the recent part. And that changed spectacularly once the funding agency said, hey, listen, you can get our money, but we want the data to be out in the open after your study, full stop. When you don't want to do that, please move on. You won't get our subsidy. That helped a lot. So behavioral change by force is sometimes very powerful. It usually fails when it's the only measure, but with good education and with good argumentation, it is a really forceful way to change things. Here I have slides on the open data. Usually it's done according to the FAIR format, findable, accessible, interoperative, reusable. Um, there is a nice data, a nice website for that. There are many good reports. Most universities I know have now facilities for it. They have data stewards, they have repositories, they have all types of course on the matter. So it's really got flowing, the open data, once the funding agencies and a bit later also many journals started demanding that. So that is an improvement, and I hope that the same will happen with the registered report when the journals and the funding agencies will join efforts in realizing that we will all follow. And rightly so, because it's such a wonderful idea, but we need some hints to do so. Another thing, this is more biomedical, I should admit, is that we also discovered that articles are sometimes so unclear because many details are lacking, or what is in there is ambiguous. And for that, in my field, biomedicine, there is now a whole industry of the production of reporting guidelines. It's a wonderful industry. You have reporting guidelines for everything, and it happens in social science as well, increasingly, and maybe in other domains. I don't know that. In biomedicine, we have now already more than 550. Um, this is the most important one for trials. Prisma is for systematic reviews, START for diagnostic studies, and this is for animal studies in the preclinical domain. But there are many more. So please don't make your own reporting guideline. Go to this wonderful website and find yours when you are in social science or in biomedicine. And you can use them not only to write your paper, but you can also use them to make your study protocol and your grant application. And they are wonderful teaching guidelines as well. When I'm teaching epidemiology, I'm also always having slide with the items of these guidelines in my slide deck, because there's a nice summary of the material. Good. Some data. We did a survey in the Netherlands, a national survey on research integrity. This great lady, Gauri Gopalakrishna, performed it. The whole stuff is in the cyberspace, questionnaires, data sets, full protocol, full data analysis plan, all tables made in the data analysis plan. So I invite you, when you like it, to redo this study in South Africa. It was useful in my country. I don't know whether we will get different results in South Africa. They won't be that different, I guess, but it's nice to have local data when you talk about research integrity. And this is what we found. We had questionable research practices, 11 of them in the survey. They need to be answered on a 7-point scale, going from never to always. In the last 3 years, I never engaged in this thing in the last 3 years, or I do it all the time during the last 3 years. And this is the 5 most important ones we found with the highest prevalences, and prevalences is 5, 6, or 7 on that 7-point scale. This is selective reporting, 17.5%. This is not mentioning in your publications important flaws and limitations of your work, 70%. And please note, this is self-admitted. We guaranteed good privacy, so the identity protection was optimal. It was foolproof, and people believe that. We checked it as well, of course. But it was still self-admitted. So you have to admit to yourself to do something which is less ideal. And 70% admitted it, 50% admitted to being a poor supervisor. To the people they have to supervise, it can be students, it can be PhD students, it can be postdocs, it can be colleagues or lab technicians, whatever. 50% as well, insufficient attention to the skills, the equipment, and the expertise. And 50% admits inadequate note taking. And when you take all these 11 together, we have at least one highly prevalent among more than 50% of our population. So this is not an exception, questionable research practice. This is a rule in a way. It happens a lot. And also, which is quite shocking, 4.3% of the people admitted to data fabrication at least once in the last 3 years. And this is nothing small, this is big. Same holds for a little bit less maybe, but same holds for falsification. And focusing on this one, that means that when you have a nice department of 25 research colleagues, on average, one of them is a fraud. Now, your department is nice, of course, so there will be 2 in the neighboring department, but still, it's a lot. It's really a lot. So let me say it simply, there is still room for improvement. And that's the reason we also looked in the survey about explanatory factors. We have a few here. When people believed that reviewers can detect their misconduct, which, by the way, they cannot, but when you believe that, these people engage less in fabrication and falsification. When they subscribed and supported the Metonian norms codified in all these codes of conduct, they had also reported less QRP, less FF, and more responsible research practices. This is responsible research practices, mainly the open science stuff I alluded to before. When they had perceived, so subjective publication pressure, when it was high, they engaged more in QRP and less in responsible research practices. These things take time, of course. And this is two modes of supervision. There are two scales. All these scales are validated and well documented, and you can find all the stuff on the web as well, that you can spend a week on reading the stuff of this study. We have two scales, and that they existed already. For the good supervision, that's responsible supervision. You help people to do the right thing, and the right thing is less QRP and more responsible research practices, and you see that happen in the results. And you have also supervisors who learn you the trades and the game, how it is played now, and that means that you have to have a lot of spectacular findings, a lot of wonderful publications, and a lot of citations. And you get them by cutting corners, by engaging in questionable research practices. And yes, that's higher among these people as well. So the basic dilemma is, I believe, that is what is good for truth and trust is not always good for your career. And it goes simply and simplified like this. We love positive results because they get us high impact publications. They draw a lot of citations. We've seen that, and you get a lot of media attention. And all these three help you to get your next grant and tenure if you want to remain in academia. And now, in a cynical way, the good news is that QRPs and also research misconduct are great tools. They're great tools to get positive results, which are then, of course, false positive results. And there is pressure from your personal interest when you want these things, and sometimes also from sponsor interest to engage in these suboptimal forms of behavior. So that is the problem, and also that is partly the explanation of the publication crisis, because false positive results are difficult to replicate. And these are the groups of drivers most people discriminate. You have the individual factors. Are the individual researchers virtuousness enough? You have the institutional factors. What is the research climate in the lab you're working in? And this might be a very important driver because we're social animals and we imitate each other all the time. It's hard. It's so difficult to remain different from the pack. And then we have systematic factors, and that is the chapter of the incentives, the partly inadequate incentives. And I will allude in the rest of my presentation to these three. Here are the Metonian norms. I'm sure you've read about them. They're quite clear. Communism, it's not your property. It's a public property, research findings. Universalism, it's about objectivity. It's not, nothing subjective. At least you should weed it out as much as possible. You should not be distracted by other things than truth finding, uh, by being promoted or by getting a higher salary or whatever. Um, and you should engage in organized skepticism. That means we play the game by argumentation and agree and disagreement and debates. That is the idea. Together, our wisdom is better than the single wisdom, and experts they do exist, but they don't they can be disputed, and they should be disputed. This is a beautiful article. You should read it yourself. It's not long, and it shows, and that's organized skepticism, why intellectual humility in science is so important. Don't exaggerate the novelty. I just put a few highlights in here. Uh, You should be transparent which analysis were planned. We discussed that before. Be careful with calls or claims, like I tried to do with our survey. I didn't put it in causal terms because it was basically cross-sectional association only. You need more for causality. Um, and also encourage criticism. Really appreciate it when people don't agree with you and when they correctly you and when trying to replicate your work. So these things are important, and this is a great paper to teach your students as well. Now I want to tell you about our European consortium standard operating for research integrity, the SOP4RI consortium, and we made a toolbox for research institutions, what they can do to foster research integrity, because that is an important responsibility. They are the guardians of the research culture in academia and outside it as well. We published 140 guidelines. Some of them were present already, some of them we improved, some of them we made ourselves. It's a great tool. Please go there. And when you are in the business of giving funding for research, we have a toolbox with 25 guidelines for you as well. It's really worthwhile, and many universities are now using it. This is the stuff, research environment, that's culture, supervision and mentoring, training, ethics committee structures, integrity breaching committees and how you handle that, and all kinds of codes, data practices and management for the open data thing and to do it right. Collaboration, which is complex, especially with private party and internationally, you need rules for that. Interest declaration, so that conflict of interest can be recognized, and publication and communication rules, because a lot goes wrong there as well. We've seen that during the COVID pandemic, for instance. This is an example. 4 guidelines one of my PhD students made for research integrity education, for bachelor, master, and PhD students, for postdoctoral investigators and senior researchers, also for the other research integrity stakeholders in the institution. And you should do that repeatedly. It should be a continuous education. A once only course never works. These are great guidelines. Please have a look. And implementing research integrity, this is the student that did the work on the last slide as well, Krishma Labib. She's really wonderful, and she defended a PhD thesis last week. The reference to it is also below the slides. I added to that. Institution can work and influence researchers through market hierarchies and network. Markets is in incentives, and then you get competition. Incentives are typically career points for desirable behavior. You can use hierarchy and you say, we are the boss, you should do this and that. And what you get then, because you need to check it, you get a lot of bureaucracy. You can also do it together. We call that the network approach. Then the main driver is trust and solidarity and cooperation. Now, this is wonderful, but it goes slow and sometimes it doesn't work. So you need a little bit of market and hierarchy as well. But she argues in a wonderful paper, it's published as a preprint, but it will be published as a paper in the near future, that you should focus on network approach, do it together, using in a clever way elements of markets and hierarchies as institutions. And then stuff starts working. This is another one of my wonderful bunch of PhD students, Tamarinda Have. She, together with Juri Tijdink and Louise Menning, which is a professional academical trainer, they started a course called Superb Supervision, which is a course in which people learn how to supervise PhD students. And it's evaluated very well. There is intervision and supervision connected. There's a lot of training in open science modalities, but because usually the more senior investigators have no clue what to do and how to do it and why it is important. And it's a big success. And training of supervisor is an important determinant of culture as well, I believe. And let's not forget the people themselves. The main stack of people doing the work are early and mid-career researchers. Let's never forget that. They can drive change, and in fact, that's what they do. They have all types of wonderful inventions like open science communities. In the Netherlands, we have them on every campus. Reproducibilities, journal clubs discussing critical stuff on the topics I've been alluding to today. Internationally, they're about everywhere. It started in the UK because they really drink tea, but you can supplement that by coffee, of course. And then you have the great initiatives of the reproducibility network, which try collectively to find the replication crisis. The Dutch one is not yet there. It has been founded. The website is under development. I'm not sure whether there is one in South Africa already, but it's a great idea to open one. And young researchers are leading the pack. They know what is important to improve academia, and the best thing you can do is to give them the floor and listen to them. You won't be disappointed. Final topic, and that is assessment of researchers. We do that all the time for grant applications, vacancies, promotion, tenure, awards. We do that all the time, really. Um, and we do that with incentives. Basically, and I simplify a little bit, what matters is a lot of publications and a lot of citations. And also getting a lot of money for grants counts for promotions at work, of course, and tenure. And the problem is that incentives work so well. When you have these incentives, yes, you get more publications and citations. You've seen that in your country, in South Africa as well. But you also get unintended effects. You shift the focus on quantity, not quality, when you do so. You get more plagiarism and duplicate publication. I believe that this is a serious problem in many countries. South Africa is no exception to that, especially because your universities are funded so much by the indicator of number of publications. You get salami slicing, the smallest publishable units, gift authorships. When you give an authorship to someone in another university, both universities profit. So you can rub each other's back there, and that happens in many countries. And also, people use predatory open access journals because then don't ask critical questions. When you pay, they just publish your paper. You also get paper mills. I have a few slides on that as well. Um, Fake papers in other domains. And now we have the problem of fake peer reviewers. Sometimes you are asked to um, propose reviewers, and when you propose a big shot in the field, but for this instance make a wrong email address ready that caters in your mailbox, you can write the reviews of your own papers, and surprise, surprise, they're usually positive. The richer are made richer, you get less equality, and it's less time consuming to avoid responsible research practices when this is the indicator. Now, please remember, no matter what the incentives are, they will all be gamed when the stakes are high. So better have a few of sensible indicators and keep it a little bit fuzzy. And that is exactly what we propose in this narrative review. It's a good summary, I believe, of all the really wonderful activities to reform researcher assessment going on worldwide. It's still a preprint, but it will be an open access book chapter soon with the same text, so you can go by the preprint. This is what's happening in the Netherlands. We call that room for everyone's talent. The idea is that there is also a need for diversity in the way we assess researchers. And that's happening now in the Netherlands. It's by far not yet ideal, but the awareness is there and improvements are being made. And this is this new awful culprit on the block, the paper mill. This is an industry, and there can be big criminal companies doing so. When you pay them, they give you a publication. You can even use a no cure, no pay basis. You can pick the impact factor you want. When you have something, they can use it. When you have nothing, they make it up. Paper mills are helping you to a wonderful list of publication with the slight problem that you are not a real author of these publications. But you need them, for instance, in some countries to become a medical doctor or to get promotion or tenure in academia. So when you make that too strong, it is an perverse incentives, and that is the business model of paper mills. You can bruise them from scratch or by plagiarism, picking pieces of other stuff. There's now good software can do it. You don't need humans anymore for it. So they're basically selling fake authorship, these paper mills. I alluded already to the fake reviewers. A new thing is supplements. Supplements can have guest editors. These paper mills make sure that it's a fake guest editor and they accept everything they want to sell to the clients in supplements. So now we see withdrawals for complete supplements of conference that never were there, fake conferences. It's amazing what's happening, and this is a new thing we are fighting, and publishers and journals are so worried about it, and rightly so. And then of course you have the predatory open access journals, but we know about that already for a few years. These are the heroes. These are the heroes, the detectives that find fake papers. Elizabeth Bick, you might know, she's the one. She can recognize animals, pictures that have been falsified, um, and she has identified thousands of fake papers already, and she's complaining, and rightly so, all the time that the journals and the publisher are not responding at all, or too late, or doing too little. I won't explain them all, but this is the other guy I want to mention, and this lady that she really unmasks complete paper mills, a few in Russia, a few in India, a few in China. This is the software developer. He made the problematic paper screener. And when you make a fake publication, you should be careful that plagiarism is not detected by plagiarism screening software. So you have to use other words for words in the text you are using. For instance, breast cancer becomes bosom peril. Random forest becomes arbitrary woodlands. Error rate becomes blunder rate. And this software recognizes that these are weird words, and then the alarm starts and the paper pops up and you can check it. And this is a completely open source thing. Please go to the website. We can all contribute. When you see something weird, you can screen it to the software. And when it's detected as something wrong, you can just report it. It's easy, and thousands of papers have been reported already. So this is the police for the paper mills. Well, we have now Chat GPT. Um, and we all also have from the same company, which is rather weird, a detector of use of that, because that program can wonderfully write articles, and it is already used by paper mills. Now, what can journals do? Open methods, open codes, open data, open peer review, I believe. Check the identity and the quality of peer reviews. They still often forget to do that, but it's important. And do automatic quality checks with software screening like Authenticate, image replication. There's software for that as well, not yet that good. Statistics, check whether they refer to retracted papers. And now they're really worried about paper mills. They joined efforts in the STM Integrity Hub, which is a wonderful software suite editors and journals can use to unmask fake publications. It's under development and is not yet ideal, and it will never become ideal because the culprits invent new tricks as well, of course. Institutions can do the same thing, open, open, open. They can give training, not only in research integrity, but also in sound research methodology, should take care of the supervision and quality control, and investigate signals of fake papers. And they should reform their assessment to make the situation such that you get career points for the right and desirable behavior. And there's a way to win there. I skip this one. I end with telling you that I believe we need more empirical research on research integrity and open science and all these things. And the good news is that many, many wonderful projects and consortia are currently on the way. So in a few years down the line, the evidence base for what I just told you will be much stronger. Um, I was announced as someone who has the privilege to chair the World Conference on Research Integrity. We have a wonderful website. Next week it will be completely new and different and beautiful. So please have a look. We have a Vimeo channel with wonderful talks on it from our conferences, many of them quite interesting. And I invite you finally to the World Conference in Athens. That will be in 2 to 5 June 24. It will be a great conference again, like the one in Cape Town was. That's more in your backyard, of course. But when you can come to Athens, please do. Please submit abstracts. Please get involved in the whole thing. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I would like to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Professor Bout. I see some questions already popping up in the chat. I will read one of them for you now, but maybe I can just mention that certainly part of this particular presentation is our efforts of supporting integrity norms in our institution. And we have many issues that we have to deal with in our sector in terms of potentially perverse incentives. You may know that we get subsidy based on research outputs in the South African system. So it is quite worrying sometimes to see people with very, very large numbers of publications, and it's not always very clear to us how to tackle that problem. If it is a problem, where do you draw the line? How do you assess whether somebody's publishing too much or whether, because people are constantly being encouraged to publish more. And so there are many, many challenges for us. And I really want to thank you for your thought-provoking presentation. For me, there are many aspects of it that I wrote down that we will look at. The tools that you shared, that's really important for us, those guidelines, specifically also looking at the education guidelines, because from our side, the research office side, we want to educate and raise awareness and support our researchers as much as we can to promote responsible research practices. There's a question.
Yeah, maybe I can respond briefly to this, Tarina. I fully agree, but it takes many people to play the tango together. You need to reform the system in South Africa. I believe it's not a good idea to have number of publications being almost a single indicator of the amount of finances a university get. That's a strong perverse incentive. Please stop doing so. I know that you cannot decide that, but it needs to be done. And the second thing is, and there you might have some influence, please don't translate this indicator to faculties, to departments, or even to individuals, because it gets worse the closer you get to the individual.
Yeah.
And the second thing I'd like to respond is this shows, and you can do that as well in your university, that you need to reform the way you assess researchers. Less is more. Read a few papers when you want a new professor. Don't rely on the Hirsch index, for instance, and the number of publications. Read a few of them. And I maybe even say it is suspicious when you have so many papers. And let me talk about myself. I've been I've had a privileged career in academia. I've got an embarrassing high Hirsch index, and I hardly ever mention it anymore because I'm really embarrassed about it. I didn't think about it that way in the past. So people are changing when they become aware that not more is more, but less is often more.
Mm. Yeah, that is not a message that I can say in all honesty that is being conveyed in our institution or in our country. You will know that part of the African desire is or wish is to increase our footprint in terms of research publications as in the global as part of the global footprint. So it is
Yes, I
quite
agree,
challenging.
but
Yeah.
when you're a little bit behind, you don't need to repeat all the mistakes that have been made before
Yes.
you. Please omit a few mistakes and do it the right way
Mm,
immediately.
mm,
That makes more sense to me, at least. I
mm.
know it's difficult what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let me have a quick look at some of the questions that came up. Lex, I'm not sure if you can maybe stop sharing your screen. I still see myself now in kind of slow motion here on the. So if you can find that stop share button, I think it will enable us to see you
Is this
better.
better? Is this better?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
So Professor Jimmy Volmonk, who used to be the dean of our health sciences faculty, asks the following question. Firstly, he says, thank you for an excellent talk. Could you comment on some of the key scientific integrity challenges that have emerged during the COVID-19 pandemic and how the scientific community has responded to them?
Well, I need another lecture for that, of course. It's a great question, and the lady called Gauri Kopla-Krishma, who did the Dutch survey on research integrity, together with her and a few others, we wrote a few papers on this. How the COVID pandemic showed us some elements of what we usually label as issues of research integrity, and one of them is well, that's the Mertonian norm of criticizing each other. That happened abundantly, but it happened on Twitter. It got politically charged. In my country, like in many other countries, researchers were threatened, even with serious stuff. They had to leave their own homes sometimes. Many awful things happened there. That is not organized skepticism. This is skepticism going completely astray, and we need more rules about it. And the difficult thing is, and I don't have real answers for that, although I've organized maybe 5 conferences on the topic already. The thing is, how should we handle conspiracy theories, which we saw so abundantly in COVID? I don't believe we handled them well from academia, but I still have no clue how to improve that on the similar circumstances. But now maybe 100 committees are on this specific question are trying to write a report. I've been on one of these committees and the report is ready. So if you're interested, I can send it to you. But a lot happened to academia during COVID. We learned a lot, but we still have no clue where to go exactly next. And most things are very relevant for research integrity and open science and responsible research practices and trust in research first and foremost. So this is a big thing. I would love to give another lecture on it, but I won't do it in answering this question.
Thank you so much. So there is another comment from a younger researcher that says, thank you for the lesson and that he's still a junior researcher and it really is very important for the more younger researchers to learn from senior people. As you say, we don't always have to redo the mistakes that other people might have made and that there are many, I realize that also in speaking to our early career academics from time to time, through a program that we have, that mentorship is so important. But that with the caveat that the mentor must know um, to do all about responsible research practices. And I think in some sense, in our landscape, much of these concepts are still quite new, as I believe in other parts of the world. And we need to talk about them a lot more than what we currently do.
Yeah,
Colleagues, you must please feel free to put up your hand if you want to
yeah.
ask further questions.
I want to respond to that briefly, if I may, Tarina. The several elements of what I wanted to say are in what this command has. Namely, supervisors need to become better supervisors, and one of the things they need to learn is all these wonderful new open science tricks.
Mm,
It's not in their baggage because they weren't on around when they learned the trade.
mm,
So
mm,
we need to learn them to them,
mm,
and they should realize how important they are. And the second thing is that junior researchers should not only learn from senior researchers, but it should happen the other way around.
mm, mm,
And for open science, it is happening the other way around. When you're teaching young PhD students or young master students, and you explain about the problems, like I've been doing the last hour as well, they say, "How stupid! How come that you only now invented that you need to play the game this way?" They they do not recognize the mistakes
mm,
because they didn't make them themselves, and they see immediately that you can do it better and more cleverly.
mm,
And they really see different things. We have in the Netherlands a research program for these things, fostering responsible research practices, we call it. And the research agenda has been made by postdocs. You cannot trust senior investigators to make such a research agenda. You should leave it to these people.
mm, mm. That's a wonderful notion that it's not always, I mean, I can imagine when we speak about the latest developments, also like the chat GPT, etc., younger researchers would potentially be much more in touch with these kind of developments and be able to teach people about them. Can I ask you something very specific that I picked up from your presentation? You mentioned retractions of articles, and then in that same slide, you mentioned loss of confidence statements. This is not something that I'm familiar with or have come across in terms of papers or articles that are viewed as maybe falsified or fabricated. And how does a loss of confidence statement work?
Well, I was just alluding to the fact that sometimes journals put a warning on a paper when there might be something fishy going on.
Okay,
And they have different terms for it.
okay, okay,
They call it notification or warning, or it just indicates that this is under research. It might be retracted, it might not,
okay,
but please don't trust the stuff while it's still up in the air.
okay. Very
That
interesting.
that that
All
that, that,
right,
that
all
is
right.
what I meant, and
Yeah.
is another corner I didn't allude to, but the point is I alluded to Elizabeth Bick being very unsatisfied by the response of papers,
Mm,
and she's not
mm,
the only one.
mm,
Uh, and it's difficult for journals and publishers to handle this well, but it's their core business. This
mm,
is about quality assurance. And it's not about punishing individual scientists, it's about keeping the track record as it is published right. So
mm,
retractions when the stuff is wrong need to be quick and complete. And we need to learn never to cite again a retracted paper because
mm,
we still
mm,
do that all the time because we are lazy and we use our PDFs or our printed versions and don't go back to the journal website and we just don't know that the paper was retracted.
mm, mm. There's a comment, a question from Anzani Manioka that says, "Thank you for an excellent talk. I'm a master's candidate and I learned a lot from you. Does the World Conferences on Research Integrity provide funding for junior researchers?"
The answer is yes. We have travel grants. In Cape Town, we had 40, I believe, in the Cape Town edition of the conference. There are two conditions to get a travel grant. One is we need to accept one of your abstracts. And the second is you need to come from a low or middle income country according to a certain list.
Mm,
And then you qualify. And many delegates from Africa, for instance, were able to attend the conference due to that travel support program. Uh, I'll be in Athens next week to start preparing the next World Conference. And one of our main topics is how we get sponsoring for a lot of travel grants. So
mm, mm.
we want to be inclusive and we want to give opportunity to people, but these are the two conditions.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, that is good news, and I think we will keep an eye on the developments there, and we'll certainly also distribute in our community the advertisements and the invitations for
Yeah,
the
and,
for the
and, and
conference.
locally you can do something as well in South Africa as university and the funding agency, because for the Cape Town edition, uh, well, the NRF sponsored a lot
Mm,
and the government sponsored a lot. There's nothing wrong. Many countries do that to
mm.
have your own sponsor program for attending the conference.
Yes, yes. No, I think our funders and our government departments really regard this as a very, very crucial and critical issue. I mean, we spoke about a little bit about the DHET just now and the potentially perverse incentives. I can assure you that there's a lot of awareness developing in the DHET as well. So I think it would be very important for our government departments and our funders to sponsor some of our researchers to attend that conference.
Please keep an eye on it.
Yes.
Plug the idea a little bit and notify me when I need to do something, like writing a nice email or a letter or whatever, or turning up in a meeting digitally. I can do that because this might be a way to get local sponsoring or to get sponsoring to the whole world conference, and then we can divide the money. But you can do it yourself in your country as well, of course.
Excellent. Now we will keep that in mind, and I'll speak to colleagues at other universities. We do have a big international research management congress coming up this year, the INORMS conference that you might have heard of, in Durban. So we have many opportunities to speak about these issues in South Africa and to try to change the landscape from many different, in collaboration with many colleagues across the universities.
Okay, I've got another request. Maybe also help me in getting a flyer in the conference back in German.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will.
I can make sure that the flyers are there on time when you can arrange that they will be put in the conference back.
Excellent. We can do that, and we will definitely. Yeah, I will have a global audience there, but also a rich African representation. So we will distribute that. So there's a question. Also, it's from Ms. Agoriwo. Thank you, Prof, for the great information. Is it enough to register a research protocol on the Open Sciences framework, or does one still need to publish the protocol in a peer-reviewed journal?
Well, that's a clear question, and the answer is it depends, like the answer to all questions, of course. Let me explain on what it depends. It depends on what your registration entails. Sometimes a pre-registration entails only answering a few simple questions, and that's it. That's not what I meant. What I meant is a full study protocol with all the details and all the scales and all the methods and everything. That is a proper pre-registration to me. And if you want, you can publish it. PhD students often do that because it gives them another chapter in the PhD thesis. It makes sense. You can also make it a preprint, no problem. You can also have it open on the Center of Open Science or another repository, and I consider that a proper publication as well. So there's no need to publish it in a digital journal, as long as it is there and complete regarding all the details.
Excellent. I think that answered the question. Thank you so much. Professor Bouter, I think I don't see any more hands and the chat is quiet. So I think people will go away with an incredible amount of thinking to do on practices and responsible practices. So thank you so much for helping us today to understand some of these much better, and to go and think and continue to discuss them. As you say, this is a continuous discussion, and things seem to pop up from these devious industries. The moment you fight the one thing, something else pops up on another front. So it is really a continuous discussion that we will have also at this university. And my colleagues from Stellenbosch University, please be assured of our support in your efforts to do research responsibly. And thank you so much again, Professor Bouter, for a very inspiring and thought-provoking talk. For coming to us all the way from the Netherlands, we really appreciate your support to us and for the South African landscape as a whole. And we hope that we can also again invite you, maybe one time in person again, to come through and to help us think about these important issues. So thank you very much.
It was completely my pleasure as well, Terina, and thanks for having me. I love to talk about these things, as you know. So if you see another opportunity, I'm available.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thanks for everybody who attended. I also know that it takes time from people's diaries, so I really appreciate that. We had more than 60 people in the room at some point. Now people are starting to run out to get back to classes and things from 2 o'clock. So Thank you so much, and keep well. It's very, very warm in Stellenbosch. I believe it's quite a bit cooler in the Netherlands, but keep well, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.